So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Judith Ortiz Cofer.
Thank you. Thank you. I was discussing the concept of time with Professor Ree because there's not a stereotype. It is different for me. You know, I have to set alarms. Once I get started on something, and I become interested, because that's the selfish part about teaching, is you have a captive audience anyway. So it's, as long as you're interested, you can just keep talking, you know, until they take their backpacks off the chair and start, you know, jingling their keys and looking at their cell phones. I have a script which I never follow. It's just important for me to have it. But as I was sitting there looking at you, thinking how comfortable I feel here today, I've been working on this concept of what is home and how do you know when you've arrived home. You probably think you're looking at a foreign woman, which is what my long-term postmaster in Louisville, Georgia, which is this tiny town that not even people in Georgia know where it is, you know, one of those places. Like it's somewhere in between, you know, Waynesboro and Sandersville, which they don't know where they are either. So you say it's 45 minutes from Augusta, 2 hours from Savannah. You know, but anyway, I live in the piney woods of Georgia with my husband, who is a deeply committed Georgia native. And I was thinking how comfortable I felt here among you. And that's sort of like, you know, those cartoons where someone doesn't know they're a platypus, you know? Because I know what I look like, and I don't know what I sound like. Whenever I hear a recording of myself, I ask my husband, I have an accent? And he says, no, remember, I have an accent, which is what I told him when I first met him. I said, I can barely understand you. It takes you 10 minutes to get to the end of a sentence. Please speed up, you know. So anyway, I just want to tell you how comfortable I feel here, the platypus, you know, because I hear the accent of the place that I have adopted as home, and have found that people are willing to accept me as what my husband says, I'm a Georgia mango, which is a fruit that cannot exist in nature. You have to imagine it. Not a Georgia peach, a Georgia mango. And I have lived among you for most of my adult life. When people ask me where I'm from, if I don't say Puerto Rico, they don't understand. They certainly don't understand Louisville, Georgia, you know. There, the older people say, who do you belong to? And I found out after I threw a tantrum that it's not an insult. It just means, you know, who did you attach yourself by marriage, obviously, because it cannot be by blood. And so anyway, I just wanted to thank you for welcoming me, and to tell you a little story that because you may be white and much taller than me, which are my students, I've learned to make them believe that I'm over 6 feet tall. In fact, I have young men and women who tower over me, and I stand in front of the classroom, and I actually had one come up and say, God, I've been here all semester and I didn't know you were so short. I said, the power of persuasion and assertiveness and the fact that I control the grade you will receive at the end of the semester makes me tall in your estimation. So anyway, just because we look different, I have found out, you know, over 30 years that I have been at this writing business. It's not a business, it's a vocation, because I certainly don't do it for the bucks. You get up, write a poem, nobody's waiting with a check. You write it because you must. And I have been asking myself the question, why must I write? And also, am I home yet? And at this late stage, about to retire from the University of Georgia, after teaching in a place when I started, my colleagues liked to refer to me as the only Puerto Rican English teacher this side of the Mississippi. I hope there are more now. But I find that I am most at home in the piney woods of Georgia, and I have decided that the definition of home, especially because I lost my beloved mother, whom, if you've read my books, you know that she was my accidental muse. She was a woman who married before she was 16. She never, she finished high school late in life, didn't go to college, but she put me in my place again and again. Her overeducated daughter, she reminded me of what was true and real in life. And I had this connection with her on the island, which I lost last year. And while I was there, trying to honor her by being the daughter that I needed to be, speaking in Spanish, making arrangements for a Catholic funeral, making sure she got the honor that she deserved, I realized that I was no longer at home, that without her, I was a foreigner. And I knew that because, while I was waiting for her to die in the hospital, me, the proud college professor, so proud of the fact that I can defend myself. With language, I couldn't think of the words that I needed. I'm writing a book about this called The Cruel Country, about how, and it's not about how the country's cruel, it's from a quote by the great French thinker, Roland Barthes, who said, mourning, M-O-U-R, is the cruel country. And so, not to go on, but basically, there's a phrase that keeps coming up, which is the doctors impatient for me to finish asking my question, just as I had been with the Southern, slow speech, would ask me, ¿Eres de afuera? De afuera means outside. Are you from the outside? And I got that repeatedly. Then someone would come up and try their English on me and try to help me. And I became what my mother had been in my youth. I was her translator. And she felt stupid when she tried to speak English, even though she was a smart woman. And it was because language is everything. The great Nobel laureate Czeslaw Milosz said, language is the only homeland. When you find yourself at home in the language and fully articulate and empowered by it, you are home. So that became a part of my definition of where is home for me. Puerto Rico will always be the home of my imagination. Of course, I will always be a Latina. I will always defend that culture that is so beautiful, but I'm no longer fully powerful, in that culture. And I just really, I didn't mean to give that lecture. I was inspired. And so I don't believe in inspiration. I believe in perspiration. I'm perspiring up here. Yeah. So first of all, I want to thank Leanne Riab for working with me for 2 years over the phone and by email, because last year I had my bags packed, and of all things, I had an appendicitis attack. And instead of to the airport, I went to the hospital. I want to thank those of you who sent me those beautiful homemade cards, which I intend to frame. They're art. And the sentiments are, meaningful to me. I want to thank the Writers' Conference Committee. Although these two women who were just up here belong in America's Got Talent or the Grand Ole Opry. One of the two. Do you agree?
Yes.
I want to thank the students who read my work. I know that introducing people to a literature that doesn't seem to be for you means, because when I went to graduate school and majored in American and British literature, I mainly had all men, and they were all dead, I'm sorry, mostly. Some of them were sort of still around. And the only woman I had in my syllabus was Virginia Wolfe, and she was this British lady. I tried really hard to make her my model, and I did. And I found out, your models are the message, are not the people. It doesn't matter what the person looks like, whether it's Toni Morrison or Virginia Woolf. If they're wise, the message is for you. And that's what literature is. I want to thank the professors, for using my books in their class. And with that Puerto Rican introduction, which means I probably used up half my time, here's a Southern joke. My husband attends one of my readings every year to prove that he still loves me. After over 40 years of marriage, we married at 19. I don't recommend it unless you find somebody that's a treasure, like John, and I didn't know he was. He went to a reading, and he came up, he says, honey, you know what you have in common with a Southern preacher? And I said, what? He says, you put your watch on the podium, and that's the last time you look at it. I said, wow, that's the first original joke he's told in 40 years. It was inspired by me. So anyway, I'd like to begin with a poem that's supposed to be funny. I always announce that because I'm deeply disappointed if someone doesn't laugh at the right portion of it. And of course, offended if you laugh at the wrong. I like to do that because it sort of defeats political correctness, you know what I mean? I went to a high school once where the kids were like this, didn't laugh at anything, and the teacher said, don't make fun of the Latina woman, don't laugh at her. So I knocked myself out, you know, and they were like, totally inhibited by political correctness. So then from then on, especially when I go to high schools, I say, you may laugh, but only at the appropriate places. And they're all looking at the teacher, can I laugh now? So anyway, this poem, I begin with it. It's usually, I begin with it because it was a poem like I had been rejected. My work had been rejected consistently. For several years, I had started writing after graduate school. And I had told my husband that if I didn't get this last poem I was sending out accepted, I was going to give up on writing because the rejections would say things like, our audience is not bilingual. Why don't you try a bilingual magazine, which meant one, you know, the America's Review. And so I just kept saying, you know, why do I have to send to bilingual presses? I mean, I only have words like mama, papa, and casa in there. I just finished studying the damn, you know, Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, you know, where he put Sanskrit and dead languages, and I didn't complain, you know, so why, like, you know, I was deeply offended. But, you know, so anyway, I had written this poem in sort of like to say, you know, like, is nobody listening? It's called Latin Women Pray, very early. Latin women pray in incense sweet churches. They pray in Spanish to an Anglo God with a Jewish heritage. And this great white father, imperturbable in his marble pedestal, looks down upon his brown daughters, votive candles shining like lust in his all-seeing eyes, unmoved by their persistent prayers. Yet year after year, before his image they kneel, Margarita, Josefina, Maria, and Isabel, all fervently hoping that if not omnipotent, at least he be bilingual. My mother hated that poem. She would say, of course he's bilingual. He knows all the languages in the world, you know, so, you know, she had this direct line, which I don't. The next poem I'm going to read is different. I was asked to write this book for high school students about my journey from invisibility and silence to voice. And the editors make all of these strange demands. She said, put yourself in your body at, like, you know, right before you learned English, and what did you feel in the classroom? And it was kind of painful because, you know, right now I'm seen as assertive. I don't know why, you know. And you know, I do talk as much as I want to because I can. But there was a time before I was 13 years old when after thinking that I was smart, I was put in a school where no one made an attempt to understand me. And I sort of became the invisible kid in the back of the classroom. And sometimes I knew the answers, but I knew that I would make a fool of myself trying to articulate them. And you know what it's like to be trapped inside your head, knowing the answer to the math question, but not being able to say it, you know? And so I wrote this poem called Invisible Me about the, you know, the bubble of silence. That, and also it's not just about the Spanish speaker. I have had kids in the classroom who, for one reason or another, I have one who is from Tifton, Georgia, and they have the most marvelous Southern accent in there. And she's made fun of because of this really, at Georgia. So I think like you guys are like real snobs about accents too, you know? There's the Athens accent, and it's oh so cool, you know? And then the Tifton, and whenever she opens her mouth, there's giggles in the class, you know? And I've had to sort of, you know, start pointing out, you know, the horizontal prejudice, that it doesn't come from the top to the bottom, it affects us all. You know, because then they start making jokes about wearing shoes and, you know, and it doesn't just happen to the Puerto Rican kid, it happens to the different kid. Invisible me. As a child, with the pebbles of a hard accent still tripping my tongue, the teacher's averted eyes when my hand went up as reflex, because I did have the answer to the simple problem she posed, erased me from the room. On the playing field, I sought to disappear. The jeers when I could not follow the rules of the game exposed me. I felt the motley suit graft itself onto my skin patch by patch with every mocking call, and soon I learned to think myself one with the gym wall. In time, I mastered the art of self-definition, learned to think of my mouth as an oyster, making words out of irritation, pearls from sand, and I drew and shaped myself, slowly becoming visible to the ones who wanted to see me. Now, I grant no one the terrible power to make me nothing again. Oh, thanks. What I just did, reminds me of that Marco Rubio moment that is going to keep him from the presidency because Americans are very demanding. We don't want a president who, can't drink water and speak at the same time. So anyway, I try not to be political. People ask me, when did you learn English? And as an educator and a person obsessed with language, I read those Steven Pinker books, like what happens when you acquire language. And there's these theories that different languages reside in different parts of your brain, and they're like, consoles that light up. And you either, the lights will light up for a certain amount of time and not for if you don't practice it, but whatever. There are people who resist language, like my mother. And when I was 10 years old, I tried to find the moment. When did that moment happen that I knew that I could speak English? And so I needed an answer, because that's what writers do. They sit down and think about these things that nobody cares about, and then they obsess. I obsessed for many years about how did language happen to me, And I'd like to talk to you in a minute about, how do you know you're an artist? Well, it's a condition, It's a condition that you cannot help. You have to write. Instead of putting my intelligence towards making money on the stock market, I get up and write poems. That's what I need to do and must do. So anyway, this next poem that I'm going to read, after many years of trying to think, because I knew that for a long time I was afraid to speak English, I didn't know English, and then something changed in me, and I started thinking of possible moments. And then my daughter, who is a theoretical mathematician, doesn't understand. Her favorite question to me all during her college years was, does your brain really work like that? Because our brains are completely different. I don't know where she's coming from. And she does mathematics with the same passion that I do poetry. So we try to find a common ground. Her field is so theoretical that she doesn't even use numbers. So she works through analogies. And so do I. Metaphors, symbolic language, right? And so she was becoming so dull, which is not good for a half Puerto Rican girl. And she was in this PhD program at UGA where it was like 95% men and not talkative or expressive men, mathematicians. And there's my daughter. And I visited her once, and I remarked, UGA is a very old place, and it shows. I said, God, the ladies' room in the math department is like pristine. And she says, that's because there's 2 women in my program. We're the only ones who use the women's restroom here. So anyway, I used to send her poems to keep her from losing her soul while she was getting her PhD in mathematics. And she, in turn, would send me what she thought was popular mathematics, totally inscrutable articles about what she was doing. And she'd say, anybody can understand this. And I said, that's the difference between mathematicians and poets. We are reality-based, We know, when people understand our work and when they don't, And so anyway, she sent me this little article on the butterfly effect. And she heard me do this talk one time, and she says, "Don't try to explain chaos theory, Mother. Please, I beg you." So, of course, she invited me to read at her university in Chicago where she teaches, and she brought all her math students. The first thing I said was, "I'd like to talk to you about chaos theory." And I said, and the students came up. She says, "That's okay. Tanya told us that you were a poet. We understand." So I felt totally patronized. So anyway, the chaos theory, I didn't understand any of it except for the beautiful language that attempts to explain chaos theory, which is that a huge phenomenon happens when a bunch of small things collaborate, like El Nino or tsunami will happen when there's a change in weather, when the waves get high. All of these things come together, and then this strange thing that I don't understand, called the strange attractor, comes into the picture, and bam, you have a tsunami or something. So I said, "That's what happened to me." And she said, "Okay." I said, "I'll prove it to you." What happened to me is like the butterfly effect is 100,000 butterflies flapping their tiny wings over the Gulf of Mexico, gale winds over Iceland. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, like some mathematician actually had a moment, you know what I mean? And wrote that. And so I wrote my own theory of chaos, and of course, whenever you want to sound erudite and to impress your professors, you go to Thomas Wolfe, and you find a quote. He overwrote so much that he can justify anything you want to do. You put a quote from Look Homeward Angel, you'll get like a better grade on your paper. So anyway, this is called The Theory of Chaos, October 1962, and my epigraph is from Thomas Wolfe. And I should explain one thing. When Tanya asked me what I thought the strange attractor was, I said, "Well, it's sort of like Clint Eastwood coming into a town, making everything right." And she said, "Okay," which is perfect. It's just the tone that she says it. And in my poem, the strange attractor is my guardian angel, just in case you don't get that. Here's Thomas Wolfe. "Each moment is the fruit of 40,000 years. The minute-winning days, like flies, buzz home to death, and every moment is a window on all time." I was just 10 and far away from all I had known when I was sent to find help for my sick mother. Ships and warplanes were gathering around Cuba, and my father was in one of them. Silenced by national security, dead or alive, we did not know. I could not speak English, and so was totally alone. Words in the new language were simmering in my head like bees trying to communicate salvation through dance. My life was chaos, shaped by chance, biology, and either el destino or circumstance. But then, as I entered the too bright drugstore, alien as a spaceship, sudden as Ezekiel's wheel, mysterious as the Annunciation, I could understand the speech of people. I could not read the labels, and I raised my head up to hear the voice over the loudspeaker. All was clear and fell into place, even the blinding light. It had taken 10 minutes of absolute dread, of nearly drowning in my own chemicals, and maybe of synapses folding into dams and bridges, a million butterflies lifting their minuscule wings as one, gale winds over Iceland, and the strange attractor this time dressed in aqua and pink robes and feathers, called down by my mother from fevered dreams of guardian angels to aid me. Given the gift of tongues, my heart and brain synchronized their wing beats or cranked a secret engine just long enough to allow one small frightened girl to fly a little, to hover low over the chaos and just above where meaning begins. So, thank you. I'm counting on you to sort of let me know when it's time, because I've lost it already. I was telling somebody that there's a poem called Beans in my book, and I want to read it now, mainly because I'm telling you about language and the acquisition of language. And once I had language, I had to ask myself the question, what do I write about? I mean, I didn't have a glamorous life, quite the opposite. If you had asked my fourth grade teacher, who in your classroom is going to be a writer in the future, she wouldn't have picked that little Puerto Rican girl in the back of the room, even in high school. So I had to define what an artist was for myself and declare myself a writer and just say, I'm going to write about what I want to write about. And I have to tell you that even though I quote Virginia Woolf, and she had to be my mentor because I didn't have anybody else, it was either her or William Wordsworth, and I liked him, skinny legs and all. You English teachers know what I'm talking about. He had skinny legs. So, I wasn't going to walk around in England, even though I liked Blake, he was the first unwashed hippie in history, loved him immensely. I needed to find a way, to write about my ordinary stuff, and it wasn't until I read Alice Walker and Flannery O'Connor. And I had an explosion in my head. I said, oh my God, you can write about these ordinary things. You can look outside your kitchen window and see the world. So I joined the Emily Dickinson Travel Club and stayed home and wrote. And so, so basically, I started writing about the things I knew. My mother, growing up Puerto Rican in America, that sort of thing. And my daughter is Virginia Woolf said, a woman writing things back through her mothers. And I add, and her daughters. And she looks forward through her daughters because my mother was 4'11", yes, even shorter than I am, strictly Spanish speaking, culturally a Puerto Riqueña completely. I straddle cultures, My daughter is 8 inches taller than I am, and she looks like me, but she looks like me on vitamins, what I mean? Like, after having grown up in America, her father helped too. He's got the tall genes, but at 6'4", he contributed something. And so basically, I have this scientific daughter and a minimally educated mother, and they both have taught me some things. First of all, I had to rebel against my mother's world of traditional marriage, having to acquire the domestic skills. I learned negotiation early. I remember that my mother was trying to make me watch beans while they boiled. Like I thought, my life is over if I have to wait for 8 hours for beans to get soft. I cannot do this. So, and she'd say, read something or whatever. I said, no, I can't bear it. So when my father came home and he was a strict disciplinarian in the military, I said to him, he wanted me to be a professional. He wanted me to study. I said, choose. Either I watch beans or I do my homework and study. And it actually worked. He said, leave her alone. She'll probably make enough money, to eat out all the time. And my mother said, which is what I mostly do, thank God for Domino's. But my husband cooks. I married a Southern cook. The first in America probably to combine rice and beans with Southern fried chicken. He deserves the credit. So anyway, beans has to do with the fact that my daughter, who was raised as an American child in terms of both of us were still in college when she was born. And John had to do half of the child rearing, which meant that she learned to cook. And she never had that stigma placed about, I didn't want to be a slave to the kitchen. She thought it was fun. He mentored her in mathematics while they worked. Even now, she won't let me interrupt her because, if I say something to her, she'll say, please, mother, I'm working on a theorem. And I said, I'm sorry, I thought you were making biscuits, But, and the fact is that she can combine being this powerful mathematician with being a cook, and I couldn't. It was impossible for me to accept the domestic, what I thought, was oppression. And so anyway, this long introduction has to do with the fact that we'd go to Puerto Rico every year to stay at my grandmother's house. She had 4 daughters and 8 children altogether, 13 grandchildren in the house, and the women would take turns in the kitchen. unair-conditioned kitchen in Puerto Rico. I would see them sweating in there and stuff like that. And so when Tanya said, Mother, why don't you buy yourself some pots and pans, little ones, and cook, because I have a condo in Athens, and so I can't be with John all the time. I said, no, once you buy the pots and pans, it's a commitment, no. And so I have a microwave. And so she said, just explain it to me. Are you just a 70s feminist? Or what is the problem? And so I said, I'll write a poem. So I filled myself with outrage and wrote this poem about the oppression of the stove. And wherever I go, because there's very few Puerto Rican restaurants, they take me, I read this poem and then somebody will say, oh my God, we were planning to take you out to a Mexican restaurant, but you hate beans. I always say, it's a metaphor. I don't hate beans. It's a symbol. So anyway, I'll tell you what my mother said about this poem after I read it to you. And you have to know a little Spanish. I mean, you need to pick up a little Spanish anyway, because there'll be people like me working with you, in the future, and we'll demand it. Beans, an apologia for not loving to cook, for Tanya. For me, memory turns on the cloying smell of boiling beans and a house of women waiting for wars, affairs, periods of grieving, the rains and mal tiempo to end. The phrase used both for inclement weather and to abbreviate the aftermath of personal tragedies. And they waited for beans to boil. My grandmother would put a pot on the slow fire at dawn, and all day long the stones she had dropped in, hard and dry, as a betrayed woman's eyes, slowly softened, scenting the house with the essence of waiting. Beans. I grew to hate them. Red kidney beans whose name echoes of blood and are shaped like inner organs. I hated them in their jaw-breaking rawness, and I hated them as they yielded to the fire. The women waited in turns by the stove, wrapped by the alchemy of unmaking. The mothers turned hard at the stove, resisting our calls with the ultimate threat of burned beans. The vigil made them statues, rivulets of sweat coursing down their faces, pooling at their collarbones. They turned hard away from our demands for attention and love, their eyes and hands making sure beans would not burn and rice would not stick, unaware of our longing for our mother spirits to return back to the soft sack that once held us, safely tucked among their inner organs, smelling the beans they cooked for others through their pores. The beans took half a child's lifetime to cook. And when they were ready to bring to table in soup bowls, the women called the men first in high voices like whistles pitched above our range. Food offered like sacred steaming sacrifice to los hombres. El hambre entered the room with them, hunger as a spectral presence, called forth from whatever other realm the women visited when they cooked, their bodies remaining on earth to watch the beans while they flew away from us for hours. As others fed, I watched the dog at the screen door, legs trembling, who whimpered and waited for the scrap. I hated the growling of pleasure when at last it got its gory bone. I resisted the lessons of the kitchen then, fearing the Faustian exchanges of adults, the shape-shifting nature of women by the fire. Now it is my daughter who keeps a voluntary vigil by the stove. She loves the idea of cooking as chemistry and the Tao of making food. Her waiting for the beans to boil is a meditation on the transformative properties of matter, a gift of memory food from my island. And I come out of my poem to partake, to share her delight in the art of feeding, like a recently freed captive of a long ago war, capable at last of a peaceful surrender to my old nemesis, el hambre. The nature of art is that you take what shapes you and you present it, and it becomes the truth. So it's a little different than the facts of journalism. I'd say that in complete self-defense. I called my mother and I said, do you remember when you used to go to Puerto Rico and Mama used to make one of the women sit at the table there, or sometimes all of you went in there and we couldn't reach you, and one of the other aunts would take care of us and the woman who was cooking would not emerge until night? I said, did you just hate that? And she said, hija, you have such an imagination. She said, those were our days off from the children. She said, we used to sit there and gossip and watch telenovelas and talk about the men. I said, that's just horrible. Why weren't you suffering, you know? And so you don't need to know this. It's not in the book, and I won't add, I'm not Eliot. I'm not going to add tiny little footnotes to my life. The fact is that my truth is my truth, and I felt it. I needed to release myself from those bonds, and my daughter doesn't. You can be a young woman, an engineer, a mathematician, and a foodie, whatever that means. So anyway, since I've been talking about my daughter, I'd like to read one that, this happened a long time ago. She's a professor, and she has a child. I have this gorgeous 5-year-old grandson, and she's completely secure in her chosen field. But when she was a graduate student, she literally became, subjected to an incredible discipline because she felt that she had more to prove than anybody else. And she'd say things like, she'd write me, and I talk about her so much because she's so witty and fearless, But anyway, she'd say, when a math student knows he's been at the library for too long, says, she starts looking at fraternity boys, symbols on their T-shirts and trying to figure out the theorem. It says, and you know what? They mean nothing. So, right, okay. And so she was joking, but I know what she means. It's like everything became mathematics. So our deal was that she'd come home on New Year's Eve, and we'd all go out, and we'd go listen to music, and she and I would dance because my husband is this 6'4" white guy. He's always asking me to come up with a better way to refer to him because he thinks that's a little harsh. And I say, okay, 6'4" Caucasian male. I says, no, that sounds like a crime report. Well, if you guys, I say it lovingly. He's a tall white guy, and he has no sense of rhythm. I don't know what is wrong with his hips. Or for 40 years, my mother tried to take him out dancing, and he claimed that it wasn't possible. There was something about the center of gravity. But anyway. We'd go out dancing, my daughter and I, and forget about our lives in academia and whatever. And one New Year's Eve, she arrived and she says, I can't go out with you. I have a problem to solve. And I said, we all have problems to solve. She says, not like this. It was, a mathematical problem. So she locked the door to her room. I called my mother, and she says, I can't talk to you now. I'm going dancing with my group. I said, my life is nothing, in America. I'm prone to global statements like that. And John says, let's just watch a little TV. So we turned it on, and there was a National Geographic special on molecules of air, which interested John a lot, So I watched it, and I heard some things that were mildly interesting. One of them is that the molecules of air are the oldest in the universe. And therefore, when you breathe in, you're literally breathing in all of human history. That's a little scary, people. Because you're breathing in Genghis Khan, Hitler, these unwashed masses of the Middle Ages, and as well as Christ, Mother Teresa, and all that. But I started thinking about that obsessively because that's my job. And it went into this poem. I also use it aggressively in my classes. If I note any hint of racism, I suggest that they start wearing a hazmat suit because it's the only way they're not going to breathe in each other and become part of each other. I know that that's not nice. I only use it in extreme cases, This is notes for my daughter studying math on the morning of a new year with a little science in it. Mira, mira, our Spanish-speaking kin are always saying, look and look again. It amuses us, this insistence on seeing, even when they mean listen. Could it be that they keep the world less at bay than we, their exiled children? That they can see emotions in color? Anger is the scarlet hibiscus. Joy, the blue of the Puerto Rican sky after a July rainstorm. And grief, a black mantilla on the head of the woman sitting alone in the last pew of an empty church. Mira, hija. I say to you in my mother's voice when I mean listen. And you may turn your eyes in the direction of some unexpected bit of wonder. The dull gray city pigeon is iridescent in a certain slant of light, and she perches at your window. If this is not enough, pues mira, the sun shines indiscriminately over everything. Mira, hija. Even the shadows make interesting designs on the concrete. Listen, whatever the weather, when you step outside and breathe deeply, you inhale the history of our race in each molecule. Eve's desire, Cleopatra's ambition, Magdalene's guilt, the new world of Isabel of Castile, the fierce conquest of Elizabeth and the genius of Sor Juana and Virginia Woolf. Here too remains the labored breath of an old woman fishing a day's meal at the dumpster, and the fears of the 14-year-old runaway who will soon run out of breath. My own relief as the nurse settled you in my arms on the day you arrived into the breathless world. Try to speak in Spanish in your dreams. Say sol, dia, sueños as you fall asleep. See if you can believe that tomorrow may be the day you have been designing in the dark. An algebra from particles of light, swirling behind your eyelids, your own private theory of relativity. And I'll end with that El Azul poem because I guess the only reason to go to readings is to learn a little something about how things are created and made. That's why I don't understand why dull writers will just, I'll read this and I'll read that. And why did you write that? You know, what is the point? How does it relate to me? But I have a very strong narrative impulse anyway. So to understand El Azul was, have you ever read like the Charge of the Light Brigade or one of those dull Victorian poems that were Tennyson and other people were forced to write by Queen Victoria or other monarchs? They're called occasional poems, and that's a nice word for holding a gun to your head and making you write. And 1 year, a vice president who shall remain, unnamed at the University of Georgia, said, Professor Cofer, I have an idea. And I said, God save me. When an administrator has an idea, present company excluded, you try to look at other people like they mean you, because that means like a lifetime will be spent complying. And so she said, we have the most diverse class of freshmen coming in the fall, and you are going to write a poem for them. I said, I'm sorry, I'd rather die. She said, you have until September. It'll be wonderful. I wrote to her secretary and I said, I can't do this and you can't make me. And she says, I think the vice president can request this from you. So I went home to Puerto Rico to see my mother and sat there in utter misery across the table from her. And her idea of letting me write was to sit there with her cup of coffee staring at me. Can we go out now? Vamos a refrescar la vista. That means refresh your vision is idiomatic phrase. It can't be translated. I said, Mother, I have to write about how I brought the worlds of Puerto Rico and Georgia together into one singular vision. She says, that's just really dumb. Let's just go out, So I went with her to this hillside, and if you've ever been to Puerto Rico, and this is completely ethnocentric, the water there is the most gorgeous in the world. There's like 10 shades of blue, from the transparent to the turquoise to the aquamarine or whatever. And not having read Oedipus and not knowing the consequences of hubris, my mother said, mi cielo, mi mar, this is my ocean and my sky. And she says, how could you live over there, she'd call it, when you can live here? And I'd say, because I would not be able to sustain my lifestyle that I've become accustomed to over here. I don't want to just, I explain it again. And so she says, well, you could have this sky and this ocean. And all of a sudden it hit me. Those are the lines I needed. She's there because that's the landscape of her soul. This is what she needs. She could not be happy 25 years in the United States because she was missing her soul vision, So I started writing this poem with those words about her vision of beauty, and then I went home and they were clearing a field on the farm that we live, and my husband was on the porch saying, is there anything more beautiful than the fog hanging over the pond and clear field? And then at that time, our omen, who it's a blue heron. He's a bachelor, never brings a wife with him or whatever. Every year he comes, pays us a visit on the pond, has like a 6-foot wingspan. And he lands like an omen, like a vision, and then he leaves again and he says, you see, there is nothing like it. And I said, if I can get those two visions together, my mother's idea of where she needs to live to feed her soul, and my husband's idea, it's about all I can do to say that, if you could listen to someone and say, yes, Anchorage, Alaska is a beautiful place because the snow is extraordinary, and mean it, and they can say the Georgia red clay is as gorgeous as anything you have ever seen, then we have achieved some kind of common ground. So I'll just read this. I know you have to leave, and I'll end with it. And you have to imagine me in full academic regalia, a fool, reading this poem. To understand el azul. We dream in the language we all understand, in the tongue that preceded alphabet and word. Each time we claim beauty from the world, we approximate its secret grammar, its silent syntax, draw nearer to the Rosetta Stone for dismantling Babel. If I say el azul, you may not see the color of mi cielo, mi mar. Look once upon my sky, my sea, and you will know precisely what el azul means to me. Begin with this: the cool kiss of a September morning in Georgia, the bell-shaped currents of air changing in the sky, the sad ghosts of smoke clinging to a cleared field, and the way days will taste different in your mouth each week of the season. Sábado, Saturday is strawberry. Martes, Tuesday is bitter chocolate to me. Do you know what I mean? Still, everything we dream circles back. Imagine the bird that returns home every night with news of a miraculous world just beyond your private horizon. To understand its message, first you must decipher its dialect of distance, its idiom of dance. Look for clues in its arching descent and the way it resists gravity. Above all, you have to learn why it aims each day toward the boundless azul. Thank you.